So to start everything, we need to create our backend folder firstly. So you can just open a command prompt, go to desktop or whatever file or path you want to start your project, and we need to make a folder. And let's name it Cookbook a project. Okay, let's see in that Cookbook project. And now we want to start with the backend firstly so we can get the APIs and so on. And even if you are a beginner, I will teach you everything. So to start with the backend, let's just create the Django framework. Let the Django framework to create our backend firstly, or configuration. So we can just activate our environment. I already have an environment. It's called my Flask env. To create an environment, I'm going to post a video for this one, but what you can do to make things easier, let's just do the environment right now with you. So I'm going to deactivate my environment. Let's create another one. Deactivate my Flask env. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we can use virtual env. So virtual env, virtual or cookbook env. Okay, this is going to be our environment. If we go to the folder cookbook that we created, we have the environment right here. So the environment is just a folder where we want to store our dependencies for the backend, so the installations and stuff like that. To activate that environment, we need to call it the name of it, so cookenv dash scripts dash activate. We can install Django in the environment because we need to install it to use it. If you don't have pip, you can just do a quick search on the Google on how to install pip. But the majority of you are going to have the pip. Okay, now we install the Django. If you go to the folder, Cookbook for object, Cookbook project. Oh, we just installed the Django in the environment. Okay, to start the actual project now, because we have the Django installed, we can use it to start the backend. Just write Django dash admin start create project, and let's call it backend. Sorry, start project backend. Now the Django framework created the backend configuration, so we have the backend folder that we just created, and then manage.py file is just a file that will help us run the configurations, run the server, make migrations for the database, and so on. Okay. And in the backend, I'm just going to open this with Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever file editor you want. I prefer this one. So desktop, Cookbook project, select folder. Now we have the environment folder and the backend folder. Manage.py, as I said, is going to help us run the server, make migrations, create the database, and so on. And in the backend, we have the settings, which is just the basic configuration file for the Django. So because we pip installed Django and created a project, it did that by itself. So we don't have to do anything. The idea is that we need to create an app. An app is just a separate folder in the backend that is going to represent our functionalities. In bigger projects, let's say Facebook, you want to have an app for users, an app for account profiles, an app for, I don't know, you have different folders for different requirements. Uh, uh, let's say that we are making a notepad app. We are going to have an app for the notes functionality and an app for the users functionality, but they're going to be separated. So let's create our first app. cd into the backend, Python manage.py, start app. Let's call it API. So to make things easy to understand. The API, uh, it's helping us to send the data, let's say like this. So we are going to have a front end, which is going to require our database, or let's say data, or it's going to require all the data that we have stored into the database. So we're going to make a recipe book. So it's going to need to ask for the recipe, for the ingredients, for the steps to create that recipe. So this is going to be uh, the role of the API. So the API is just going to send that data when it's required. We're going to see it later. To make this folder work, we need to register it into the backend. So the backend, into the configurations file for the Django, we need to tell it that we created an app and we want to register it. So in the API, we go to the apps. We need to add this config class to the settings and add the installed apps. So we need to go to the API dot apps dot API config. And now Django knows about this project. Okay, now let's structure the database. So to structure the database, we need to think what we are going to be using. Firstly, I want to import OID. So this is just going to help us create some secured IDs, let's say like that, some IDs for the recipe, for the ingredients, steps, etc. We need to have a recipe class. So in Django, the classes are going to be representing the database models or the tables. So this is going to be inherited from models.model. Now Django knows that this class is going to represent the table in our database. It's going to have a name of models dot. Let me just see what's not good here. So models, we imported models, that model. I don't know why it doesn't show me the data, models, that model. Anyway, so we need a name, which is going to be a char field. So models, that, and it's not showing me the elements, but it's fine. This is going to be a char field. The max length of this char field is going to be 50. So I'm not going to have a recipe with a length more than 50. We want to have a blank equal to false and the null equal to false. Why? Well, because this means that we cannot save a recipe without a name. So let's just make things as simple as possible. Good. This has to be an uppercase. Okay. Every recipe needs to have an ID, a specific ID, because they can have the same name, but we still need to differentiate between them. So this is going to be a models that you either field. I don't know how to pronounce this. Default. So we don't have to create the ID. It's going to be created automatically, and this is why we imported UID. So the default value is just uid.uid4. This is going to create an automated ID for our ID field from the recipe. We want to make it a primary key, and I want to not be able to edit this one because you can create some really bad decision for the future if you can edit this one. It shouldn't be editable. We can't save an ID with a blank ID, so it can be blank or null. And I want to be unique. It's going to be true, so I don't want to have more recipes with the same ID. That's all the idea. Now I want to store the images, so models.image field. Let's say that we can have a recipe without an image, so blank true, null true. The category want to be a char field category, so The category is going to be something like it's a sweet recipe, so it's a sweet category, it's a savory category, it's a light category, I don't know, salads and stuff like that. So it's just going to be a char field. Blank is going to be false. We can have a null as false. And of the max length, let's say 50. We can add a default. So let's say that the default is going to be sweet. So the sweet category. And the specific category, why? Because we can have the sweet recipes, but maybe we want to get the cookies or the cakes. So this is going to be something more specific. It's going to be models.charfield, blank again false, null again false. And the of max length of 50, a default, let's say, cookie category. That's good. Now we can specify how we want to see it into the database. So def string self return self.name. This is going to be the return statement when we want to see the recipes. So I want to see every recipe by name. Every recipe is going to have more ingredients. So we need to store the gradient models.model. The same is going to have, so the ingredient needs to have a connection with the recipe. So an ingredient is going to be in a relationship with the recipe. A recipe can have more ingredients, but an ingredient can be only for one recipe. This is the logic that we want to create. So every ingredient that we create is going to need to store the ID, let's say like that. So it's going to have a relationship with the recipe. So foreign key, recipe on delete, models that cascade, which means that when we delete a recipe, we want to delete all the ingredients from the database. Related name, I don't think that I have to add this one. Okay, a name models.char field of max length. Maybe an ingredient can have around 100 characters, blank false and null false. And I want to see it by its name. So return self.name. Okay, that's good. Now, what we can do is to create the steps. So we have the gradients, but we need the steps too. So for the step, models.model is going to be exactly the same thing. Okay. Now, what I would like is to actually create the database. So in Django, to create the database, we can go to the terminal, or just go to the command prompt that we already have. We can close the server, and to you need to differentiate between migrate and make migrations. Make migration is something, let's imagine that we make changes into the database and want to apply it. So we hit make migrations and we can see how the migration would affect, how the changes would affect my database. And then hit migrate to actually update the database. So we made some changes. So we can go to python-py make migrations. This is going, let me just see something. You can use, okay, we need to say pip install below. So we can use the image field. Now make migrations. This told me that we created the model recipe, step and ingredient. I like it, so I want to actually migrate it. So to save it into the database, migrate. That's it. To see our database, we can create an admin user. So Python manage.py, create super user, a name, an email, and a password. Okay. To start the server, Python manage.py run server. As I said, the manage.py helps us to run the server and stuff like that. Okay. This is the Django main page, we can go to dash admin, enter your username and the password you created. And from what you can see, we can reset our database. So to actually see the database, we need to register those classes. We can go to admin, and to import them, we need to go to the models and they import, let's see, recipe, then step, then ingredient. And now we can register them. So admin that uh, site that register recipe, and do the same for the following two. So step and ingredient. Okay, that's a good one. Now we should be able to see it. And you can see the ingredient, recipe, and step, and it's in the API app. We can create a recipe, add recipe, and you're going to have a name, I don't know, protein shake. I can add, I don't know, let's add a coffee image. Sweet, it's sweet, yes, and it's a protein shake, or just protein. Save it. We can actually see the recipe, but we cannot see the ingredients and steps. So ingredients, add ingredient. As you can see, we need to specify which recipe has this ingredient. So the protein shake and the name, I don't know, milk. So we need milk. Then we need the protein. Save it. And the steps. Add the step, and it's needing the recipe. So the name, let's say, the first step, it's like add milk, mix with protein. And that's my favorite recipe. Okay, and now we can see the protein shake, which is having those two steps, and the ingredient. It's just a relationship between them. So the recipe is having more ingredients and more steps. And every step and ingredient is related to a recipe. Okay. Uh, you could see the name because we did that def return self.name. But the idea is that we want to send this data to the front end. So when we will create the React front end, so a web, a front end, a web, so a page, we need to send that data. So we need to have some endpoints. What I want to do is we have some URLs. The URLs are just going to specify. Let's make it simple. Which function is going to be triggered when we are on the, I don't know, end page? And I don't want to create the URLs here in the back. I want to create it in the API folder. So we can hit include. So when we are going to the API dash something, I want to include the API folder. So api.urls. So I want to create another file URL so we can use it here, not here. We can copy everything from this file and create a new urls.py, paste it, delete this one, and delete this one. Okay, you can delete the include too. Now we can create our own URLs. And just to show this to you, we go to views, def show message is going to have a request, and we can just return a message. Return, I don't know if message. Maybe this is going to trigger an error, but I'm going to see this later. So URLs. So to actually import this from that import views. So the first URL. So we need to go to the API slash. So API slash, and here is going to be called hello. Views dot show message. Show message, and the name is going to be show message. And I want to run the server now. No module name API.urls. Now it should be created. Sorry, here should be path. Now let's go to the API that message or hello. This is how I called it, I think so. So we can't really do a response like that. We need to make some installations. The idea is that when we went to API dash hello, it tried to it triggered this function show message, which returned me the message. But actually, we can do it. So I can show how you can. We can see the message actually, but we need to change this a bit. So this is a way to actually see how the function is getting triggered. We can't really return a response like that, but we can do something like this: print function triggered. And if I run the server again, so we cannot see the print, but if I go to the server and go to the API dash hello, and we go here, we should be seeing somewhere the hello. So let me just function triggered here. So not the hello function triggered. So we called it, we printed function triggered. This is going to give us an error because this is not how we return the data, but just that you can see that the URL called this function. Okay, now let's actually do this to work. To actually get the data, we need to do some imports. So we go to the documentation. We have to use Django REST framework. So we can go to that terminal and say pip install Django REST framework. I already have installed, but you should install it. And to the settings, we need to make some changes. So if you go to the main settings from the backend and the installed apps, we need to add REST framework. And I don't really remember what we need to add to the middleware, but you can just do a quick search. So Django REST framework, and this is going to show you everything you need to add. So it's actually saying that we need to install pip install Django REST framework. We already did this one. Then you don't need this one right now. Then we need to add the REST framework to the installed apps. We did this thing right here. Okay, after this, we need to go to the middleware. We should have to go to the middleware. Huh. I think that we don't need to add anything to the middleware. I don't know why I remember that we need to install something to the middleware. Okay, this is fine then. Uh, let's go to the requirements. So we need to go to the install apps and REST framework. And I think that's it. So to actually make this function return some real data, we need to go to the Django REST framework. And it's going to tell us that we need to install pip install Django REST framework. So you can go to your terminal, add this one here. I already have it, so but you need to install it. And then to the installed apps, you need to add REST framework. I already added it, but go to the backend settings, and in the install depths, add the REST framework. And this should be enough. We can go to documentation, and it's just giving us some examples and all we need to install. This one should be enough for the moment. Now, I showed you that the URL is triggering the show message, which printed function is triggered. Let's get the data. So to get the data, we have to create it. So firstly, I would like to create more recipes in the backend. Let's go to run server. We actually deleted the function, so we don't have it anymore. And we can create more recipes. So go to the admin. Let's create 2 more recipes so we can actually see some data. I don't know, cookie, we don't add anything. Save and add another cookie, sweeter. Okay, save and add another. That's it. Let's add some steps for the cookie sweeter. Step 1. Another step 2 for the cookie sweeter. Okay, ingredients. Add ingredient. Ingredient 1 for the same one. So sweet. So we can see actually some data when we are going to get it. Now we need to hit path. But first let's create the function. So I created some dummy data in the backend. You can see the recipes, and I want to show it to the frontend, or not necessarily to the frontend, but we want to actually get the data somehow, and we can do this by the following. You need to understand what the serializer means. This data, it needs to be sent in a JSON format, so we cannot send the data as we have it right here. So let's say that I get the data and just send it. We need to make it understandable language. I'm going to see it. So firstly, I want to do some imports. So let's see. From models, firstly, I want to import recipe, step, and ingredient. Okay. And to actually send that data, we can add a new file, serializers.py. So the serializers is going to help us actually convert that data. From models, import step, recipe, and ingredient. Okay, from REST framework, we need to import serializers. And let's create the steps serializer. And trust me, you're going to understand everything. This is going to be serializers dot model serializers. And this step serializer should have a class meta which is going to have the step argument, so step. So this serializer is going to convert the step data into data that we can send to the front end. And I want to serialize all the fields. We have to do the same for the ingredient serializer. So ingredients, this one is going to have the model ingredient and the same all. And for the recipe, let's call it class regular recipe serializer, which is going to have serializers dot model serializer. And the same model recipe. I think that you kind of understand what it's all about. I'm going to serialize all the fields. You're going to understand everything, trust me. Let's create the first endpoint. So it's going to be from REST framework.decorators import API view. So the first API view is going to be a get one. Why? Because we want to get data, okay, from the backend. So def get recipe. I want to get the recipe and other elements. Just going to show you how stuff work, how everything works. Okay, to get the elements from the database of the recipes, we can do this. Recipes, recipe that objects that filter that all. So we want to get all the recipes, but we have imported it. We need to get all the steps for this recipe. So recipe that objects that filter. So we want to get the ingredients that had the recipe, this one. Actually, let's just, you can't really do this because these are going to be more steps. I want just to print the recipe so you can see what's all about with the serializer. So serializer is going to be recipe serializer, and we need to import it. So from serializer import recipe serializer. That's good. And I want to serialize the recipes, and it's going to be main equal to true because we are going to have more recipes to show. If everything works fine, return response serializer.data. If something went wrong, so except exception as E, we can print the error so we can see it and return response. Message is going to be data not found. So we're going to just return a message. Now we can request this one. So path is going to be API dash get recipes. We use that get recipe name get recipe. Let's go and see API.serializer line 4. Serializer recipe serializer. Let's see, we called it regular, like this one. Okay, and let's activate the server. So Python run server. No module name API.serializer. Where? Serializers. Serializer line 4. Steps serializer. Model serializers. I think that I made a typo somewhere. So in the line 4, REST framework does it has not attribute model serializers. It's not at the plural like this. That's good. This is my mistake. Sorry. And now if we go to the URLs, get recipes. So API/recipes, or actually get recipes. Let me just copy this one. API dash get recipe. Let me just go here and end this one with a dash at the end. Okay. Name response is not defined because we need to import it. Let's go back to backend, views, and to actually import the response, it's going to be from REST framework dot response import response. That's all. Now everything should work fine. Data not found. Okay, let's see why. So we are filtering the data. Recipes is going to be recipe.object.all serializer recipe serializer. We can actually see the error because of the name recipe serializer is not defined. So this is going to be the error. Regular recipe serializer, like that. Sorry for my mistake. I refresh this one and the API get recipe. So the URL API, then go to the API.url. So here get recipe, trigger the get recipe and auto relevance function, which return the recipe. But the idea is that I want to get, okay, I want to get the recipe, but you can see the ID, the name, the image, the category, the specific categories. You can see the data, but every recipe should have like an array of ingredients and an array of, you know, steps. So this is why I call the regular recipe serializer. So you can just see it, but we can create the actual class recipe serializer, and it's going to be serializer dot model serializer. So we can modify this serializer a bit so it can return more stuff. We still want the class meta to be model. So we want to serialize the recipe, all the fields from the recipe. So fields is going to be equal to all the fields from recipe. But I want to have the steps serializers dot serializer method field. I don't want to edit it, so read only. It's going to be true. The same for ingredients. So I want to be able to get the ingredients to serializer method field. That's good. And to actually get the data, we can say get def get steps. So this get underline and the name steps, which is getting the object. So the recipe, which is going to be serialized. I want to try and get all the steps that are related to this recipe, because the steps have a relationship with this recipe. So the recipe is stored in the object. So step.objects.filter all the recipes that has this all the steps that has this recipe into the relation. I think that I said this for too much today. We got the steps. We need to serialize it, because you saw here, this is a different, this is what the serializer did. So it converted it to the string, a JSON format. Okay, so we can send this data. Serializer equal to steps serializer. So we are using this serializer for the steps, and serialize the steps. They are going to be main equal to true. If everything works fine, serializer.data. If you have an error, you can just return on. So we don't have steps. I want to do the same for the get ingredients, but we want to use the ingredients serializer. I want to have ingredients here, and this should be enough. Let's do this again here in the views, but now import the recipe serializer, so not the regular one. And add this one here. Let's go to the front end and restart. And now you can see the ID, the steps, the ingredients, the name, the image, the category, the specific categories. So this is how we can send the data to the front end. Looks amazing. Okay. So this function looks pretty good. I would like to call it, let's see, what should I call it? Let's just leave it like that, just an example. In the front end, so I'm going to delete this one. It was just an example, so you can see how the serializer works. And what I want to do, so as I said, we need to have the sweet elements listed. So if you go to recipes, sweet page, I want to see all the sweet recipes. Okay, so we need to have an API view which is going to get all the recipe category. So all the sweet, all the savory, all the light. So they're going to be separate into the category. We need to have the page for the sweet recipes, for the savory ones, etc. So let's call it the PK. So the PK is going to be the category. Okay, so I want to represent the category. So let's get all the data dot object dot filter category equal to PK. So primary key. If the PK is sweet, we filter everything that has the sweet in the category. Serializers. I need to serialize the data. So recipe serializer recipe man is going to be true. And we hit return response. Let's see, message. Actually, we can just send the data. So serializers data. Except exception as E. If something went wrong, return response. Just return the error. Or print the error so we can see it and return a message. So message data not found. Okay, that's good. Now let's register this to the URL. So path, I want to call it, let's see, uh, recipe, and we need to specify the primary key. So we are sending that primary key into the parameters. Views dot get recipe. I think this is how I called it. Get recipe category. So let the URL be recipe category, and the name doesn't really matter. So name recipe category. It doesn't matter in this context. If we go to the URL, let's copy this one. In the database, we should have the sweet ones. So we should have some sweet ones. So sweet, and we got the ones that are into the category sweet. Okay. Okay. Now let's imagine that we have the page with the sweet one, the savory one, and the light one. And we go to the sweet one, and we have listed cookies, cakes, and I want to click to the cookie and send me to a page where we are having only the cookie type of data. So what we have to do is to create another view, API view, get, we want me to get data, def get specific recipe category, request, and we need to get the primary key the same. So try, let's go get all the data at filter where the category specific category is equal to this primary key. So it's going to be actually the same thing. Let's copy this one, add it here, but replace this to the specific category. And to show you this one, we need to make an APR for it. So let's call it recipe specific category. We need to still add the primary key, recipe specific, and the function is called get specific category. So let's go to this URL. So we have the protein one, the cookie one. Let's see if we can get them. So let's write here cookie, and we should get the cookie. Let me just try this one again. So cookie, the second bridge. Maybe I made a mistake. Exception SE. Maybe I didn't copy it everything. Views. Um, Something's wrong. Line A28. Exception SE. So what's the problem? Let's start the server again. exception SE. So try recipes, recipe object filter, specific category, we serialize them, we return the response. It's the same thing that we're doing here. What is that you don't like? Maybe the indentation, so be careful with this one. Yeah, it was the indentation. Now if I refresh this, we got the data with the specific category cookie. If I hit, oh, no, not this one. If I hit here protein, we get the one with the protein. If we had more shakes here, we would get all of them. So that's the idea of this view. The next view that we should create. So we went to the cookies. So I saw a specific cookie image recipe that I want to see the description, the steps. I want to prepare it. So we need to have a function that returns me that cookie, that data. So a specific one. So it's still going to be a get. So def get recipe. We need to have the request and the primary key. So this is going to be the ID, okay? The ID of the recipe that we want to get. So recipe equal to recipe that objects that get. So with the ID of this one, we want to serialize it. So serialize recipe serializer recipe is going to be man equal to false, just one, and return response serializer dot data, except just return response or just get this one, so you don't write anything the same. Good, it's registered. We can call it path. Let's see, recipe and the ID. This is why I want to get this one. Use that get recipe and the name just get recipe. Okay. If you go to the, let's just copy this one and try to get this type. So API get recipe and the ID. API just recipe, not get. And you can see that it got us the protein shake. Okay, that's a good one. What else should we need to do? Because I want to start the front end when I have everything here, we need to create one. So this is going to have an API view of post. We need to add to create something. So create recipe. And from the front end, we are going to send the data that is to create our recipe. So to do that, we can we are going to send the data from the front end and we can get it by the request. So we need to get the data, request that data. The data is going to be an array of ingredients. So if you want to create recipe data, we need the ingredients, the steps, the name of the cookie, let's say. So ingredients. This is going to be a string, so an array of ingredients, but they are going to be strings. So we need to use JSON that loads. So if we get the array as a string, we need to convert it back. So data ingredients. Okay. When so we send an object, something like this. Let's say this is the data. So it's an ingredients, an array of ingredients, the steps, an array of steps, the name, cookie, sweet, the category, the specific one, and this is how we get it. So we want to get ingredients, the step. This is what we are going to be sending from the front end. So you just want to get it. You're going to see it, trust me. So we got the data, ingredients, the same for the steps. Steps equal JSON that loads data steps, name, data dot name, category, data category. So I have to do this just for the arrays. And the image request that files, because it's something more specific. We need to get the image with the request that files. It's going to be a file. Now to create the actual data recipe that objects that create, which is going to have the name that we got from the front end, the category that we got from the front end, and the image we got from the front end. And this recipe is going to have more steps and ingredients. So we have an array of steps, and for each element from the array of the steps, we need to create that data in the backend. So for step in steps, step object equal to step dot object dot create. We need to make that relation, and the name is going to be the step. This is just a string of names, but every string is the name of a step. So for every string, so let's say the steps is something like step 1, step 2, step 3. We need to create the step 1 data in the database, the step 2 object in the database, the step 3 for each one. Okay, and do the same for the, I specify that the recipe relationship is for this one that we just created. This is going to be ingredients, and just specify in the GUI object or ingredient object, ingredient that object that create. And that's it. It should work fine. I will just copy something to make things work a bit faster, so we can return a response that everything worked fine, just fine. And if something went wrong, we can hit the exception, so the error. I don't want to send the status. Let's just keep things easier. For that JSON stuff, we have to import JSON. So go up, import JSON. Okay, so we have the create recipe. Let me just try to register it and show it to you. So path create recipe dash views that create recipe name create recipe. Okay, let's go to this path API dash create. Let me see the error. I want to delete this return because I want to keep things as easy as possible. Okie dokie. Message. The exception is not in the same line. Like this. Now you good? Happy? Nope. Indentation error. Line 62. Yep, like this. So it's in the if. Okay. We went to the create recipe, so it's waiting for the data. So we need to send an object. Let me just try and create it. So let's see. Uh, there's going to be an object. The name, we need to specify the name. name. I'm just going to call it like this, name test. The ingredients should be an array. So ingredient 1, ingredient 2. Let's do the same for the steps. Steps. Step 1, step 2. Then for the actual category suite, for the image, we just do something like this. I don't really have an image right now. So the specific, I think that I forgot about the specific category cookie. Let's just see if it's allowing this type of data. So if it's a good one. JSON expected property name closed off, and I shouldn't have deleted this one. I'll just pause for a second. Okay, so this is just some dummy data. Delicious pasta, Italian, I don't know, just some data. So this is how we send it. So post, recipe added, and if you go to uh, the category Italian, so I can get this one and go to the API specific category. I think that I called the recipe specific category. Okay, and it should send me this one. Let's go to backend. Just watch it from here. So recipe, delicious pasta. Yeah, so you can see it right here. So it get created. We go to the steps, mix everything together, garlic in olive oil. It's the name and it's related to the so this step is for the delicious pasta. Okay. Uh, but I want to get it, so Italian. Let's see if this is what I did wrong. So we go to the API, this one, and Italian. Should have sent it to me. Maybe it's a specific one. Let me just go to the database again. Admin, recipe, so delicious pasta, category Italian, specific is the specific one, sorry. So why it's cookie? I think that that's my fault. So cookie, and they return me this thing. So you can see the all the data that has the cookie here. Let's get the category one. So recipe category Italian, and we got this one because the only one with the Italian category. So it got added to the backend, to the database, sorry. So I just showed you. We got the data, the ingredient, steps, name, category, and I forgot about the specific category. So specific category equal data dot specific category. Okay, it got cookie because that's the default one, if you remember. Let's register. We already registered it. Okay, what we should be able to do is to create one. So API view create, or sorry, delete. So to delete one, def delete recipe. To delete a recipe, we need the request, the primary key, so the ID. Try, let's query the data from the backend, from the database. And we just hit delete. And that's it. Return, response, message, deleted. If we have an error, so exception, we can take this one. Invalid data, maybe it's an invalid ID. To register it, URLs, path, delete recipe, we need the ID as a string. This is why we say string. use that, delete, and the name, delete. Okay,